Hi, I'm Maria Thea Harris Lavello Sews on social media. Thanks for watching and listening to Sew Over 50 podcast on Sew Organised Style. Today, Tracey of An Upcycled Life on Instagram is our guest. Thanks to Maxine of Dung Corner for suggesting Tracey for this podcast. They're both great sports. Grab a cuppa and relax with us. Thanks for coming on to Sew Organised Style podcast. It's really great to have you. And upcycling and the sort of sewing that you do is something that a lot of people appreciate and really love to watch. And you've been doing some really interesting work in the last, at least, like I've been watching the dress that you've been doing in January, and it's just amazing.
Thank you. I mean, I've said to people recently that actually, as much as it was an enjoyable project, it was also a bit of a sanity project, I think, for
Yeah.
me. Yeah, just working, on it, the challenge of it, the fabrics I was working with, the sentimental value of it all. Yeah, it was just the most enjoyable process, actually. Um, even if even if the dress had turned out terribly, I think I would have still enjoyed the project itself.
It's quite stunning.
Thank you. I've yet to wear it in public. I've promised my work colleagues that I will. So maybe next week I will get its first official outing, and we'll see what that. They obviously though will be very kind. um, so yeah, might not be the most neutral audience.
Okay, that's fine. I think the people that know you or know us as sewers, really, I think they get to learn how much effort we put into creating sewing clothes that we love to wear. And whether
Yeah.
they like it or not doesn't really matter.
No, no, I think you're right. I think they appreciate the thought and the effort and the challenge
Mm.
that that is in a project.
So this particular dress experience, so how did it all start? How did this dress see that we've been watching on Instagram happen? So your Instagram handle is
An upcycled life.
okay.
People who follow my Instagram will know Mum got diagnosed with cancer in
Mm.
April last year and got progressively unwell and sadly passed away in late October. And I spent a lot of time with her over those 6.5 months. And at the time, much of the time, I was working on another project. It's an organza skirt that I machine stitched, individually cut flowers on, another sanity project. And Mum, she was one who taught me to sew originally, and she was always, she's, my greatest fan was sewing. Like she always was encouraging and supportive and interested in whatever, way out ideas I was working on at the time. And at some point, I think maybe August or September, I don't know, she cleaned out her linen cupboard and said to me, I'm not going to need all these. And she gave me a big box because she knows I collect old textiles and doilies and, I collect them with the purpose of using them eventually in sewing. And I don't know, sometimes just the sewing stars all align and inspiration strikes and I was looking at that time at some ready to wear dresses and enjoying the style of them, but not so much the price. And um, and had these linens, and I don't know, just the dots all just joined up. And I thought I could have a go at making a dress in a similar style, but using these linens that have come from Mum, that were, they're a collection of linens from Mum, from my grandma, my great grandmother, like it's a family treasure box, really. A lot of them, I've used the smaller ones, I think they call them afternoon tea tablecloths. So they're a smaller square. And then the tray cloths, which are even smaller again, they're not things I would use in the house. They would have just sat in the cupboard. So sometimes I don't know how these ideas lodge themselves in my head, but it did. And I actually managed to talk to Mum about it near the end. I was still working on the skirt at the time, so I hadn't started the project, but showed her the pattern idea I had and said this is what I was thinking of doing with them. And she loved the idea because the linens were going to get a new lease of life. They were going to be used. Like I said, I don't sometimes know where the inspiration comes from, but I'm really glad when it hits me on the head.
It's her legacy to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps I just feel closer to her when I'm working on these projects, and I know she knew about this one particularly and would have loved it. Yeah. And I just feel like I'll be wearing a little piece of, her history probably.
Yeah. So it's her history and also some of your grandmother's history as well?
Yep, and I'm sure it'll be my great grandmother's things will be in there too. There were some pretty old pieces, and unfortunately, because Mum got so sick near the end, I wasn't able to say how where was this one from or who made this one or but some of them are quite obviously handmade, and you think about back in the day with glory boxes and things like that, that they would have been made for special occasions or for using or for leaving home. I don't know, but one of the pieces, a little, it must be handmade piece of sort of lace around the neck that I used. I found actually that one that didn't come in the box from Mum. It was when I was going through a whole lot of photos and things that were obviously my grandmother's, and it was just sort of tucked away in there, and it was pretty stained, like pretty aged. I gave it the good old soaking out in the sunshine, and it's still got a few little age marks on it, but it cleaned up quite nicely. And I think that one particularly is really old. It was just a little, like a length about 30 centimeters long. Someone's obviously made it, but then never done anything with it. Yeah, so I feel like I'm connected to Grandma as well.
And now you have used that 30 centimeter piece that was waiting to be used.
Yeah, well, otherwise these things, I think they just, no one knows what to do with them. So they get either thrown or donated, I guess, to an op shop or a thrift shop. So I love the concept of using something, making it, upcycling it, making it usable again, or giving it a new life. Yeah.
Yeah, you have given all of those pieces a new life. And the good thing is that they're made of linen and cotton as well.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, some of them, I mean, they're good quality. Do you know, that's the other thing. Some of the fabrics, I probably 2 years ago now made a skirt out of ties, vintage and retro ties. And I first sort of discovered those at the op shop because they were small but beautiful pieces of fabric. I mean, some of them are polyester, back when, probably in the 60s, when the world discovered polyester, and it was a wonder fabric, but with cool paisley designs and jacquard, and there's silk ones and wool ones, and they're beautiful pieces of fabric. And these linens and this dress, some of them, they're just such good quality that hopefully it will last. I did sew up the back skirt and put in the zip, and then realized there was a little tear in the fabric, and I'm like, okay, don't have to do a little repair job there because I wasn't about to take it apart. But yeah, hopefully they'll last because they are good fabrics. The other thing I loved about the ties too, it was back in the day when New Zealand, made its own stuff, and a lot of them were made in New Zealand under license too. I loved finding things that were made in New Zealand originally and then redoing something with them. Yeah, just feel like it bucks the trend of fast fashion a little bit.
So when you find that the pieces that you're using are made from New Zealand and they have that tag that shows that they are, do you add that to the garment as well?
Not always, depends
Mm.
on what I'm making, but with the ties, I have in the past made bags and I would unpick the labels and then re-stitch them inside the bag or on the outside of the bag somewhere. Some of them were, I'll probably pronounce it wrong, but like Pierre Cardin ties or however you say that, or
Yeah.
Dior ties, and then I would definitely unpick that label and put that on the front of the bag.
Yeah, I would too.
My designer bag made from, op shop ties back in the days when you could get like 10 for $1.
So, can we talk about, or can you talk about where you started with your sewing journey and how you found the Sew Over 50 community?
Like many of us, my mum taught me how to sew originally, and I was listening to Rin. You spoke with Rin from
Oh,
Cookie
yes.
Things, yeah,
Yeah.
last week, and I was listening to her, and my story was a bit the same. I think I was probably younger than 10, and mum showed me how to make clothes for my Barbie dolls. Even recently I had the original little tiny, clothes with little elastic skirts and that I'd first learned how to make. So I started with that. And then in my teens, so in the 80s, I think the changing point was Marshall Cavendish released this series, and I think it was called Make It Easy. And it was a cardboard packet, and it was quite beautifully presented. And inside it had a step by step photographed instruction sheets, booklet, and patterns for things that were quite trendy at the time. And that's really what I think got me into clothes garment sewing for myself. I would follow these instructions and make these clothes. I remember making like a pinafore and a jacket that matched and doing, double rows of top stitching all around. And anything I got stuck on, I could go and ask mum. If I didn't, the instructions were great and there were photographs. But if I could just go and say, Mum, I don't understand. How do you do this? How do you do this part?
Mm.
So that's probably how I got started. Yeah, made quite a lot of clothes through my teen years and my 20s, but had quite a break in my 30s, and then came back to it relatively recently, probably only about 5 years ago, and didn't start my Instagram account as a sewing account, but it was originally called an upcycled wedding
Right.
because my husband and I got married 5 years ago. It turned out to be 4 days, 5 days before the first COVID lockdown here. It was a bit of
Mm.
a hair raising time, but originally started it to post about what we were doing because we really did upcycle, repurpose, reuse for our wedding, but morphed it into an upcycled life because I figured there's a statute of limitations on how long you can post photos of a wedding after it's been. I don't know how, but I just fell upon this sewing community via that, and realized, and hadn't known before that there was this whole amazing community of people out there who were sewing, posting about their sewing, offering advice, tutorials, um, encouraging others to, post their makes. And I found Sew Over 50, and I just turned 50, and I'm like, whoo, I fit in. Although I've since found out it's very inclusive, and I could have probably joined if I wasn't. But um,
Yeah.
yeah, and loved the positivity of it. The encouraging nature of it and the supportive nature. Um, like I look back on some of the things I posted early on that I'm sewing, and I'm like, oh, and my photos, I'm like, oh my gosh, Tracey,
Yeah.
what were you thinking? And people are going, oh, that looks lovely. That's so nice. And I'm like, people are just so encouraging and supportive. It's like, yeah, it's just a really lovely little corner of social media, I reckon, of Instagram.
It's 53,000 followers, but it's
Yeah,
still, I mean, honestly, it's still a small corner of social media on Instagram.
yeah, yeah. I mean, in my corner, it's the whole corner. Like that's all I look at, really.
Yeah.
I do post other things on my account. It's not exclusively sewing, but
Mm.
because if I did, I'd only have like about 6 posts a year because I'm so slow at sewing. But yeah, I was reading somebody's post recently, and she was talking about some of the downsides of Instagram. I completely understand what she was talking about, and if it wasn't for the sewing community and Sew Over 50 and the people I've met online through it,
Yep.
I probably wouldn't be on Instagram, for a whole lot of other external reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this little corner is such a happy place to be.
Mm.
Yeah, that's
I
how I
agree.
find it anyway.
One of the fun parts of being in the Sober 50 community is what they call the Sober 50 dating community, which is where you meet people in real life. Has that
Yes.
happened to you yet?
Um, Only through frock tails.
Yep.
So, a couple of years ago, a sewing friend and I went to Wellington here for a Frocktails community and connected with people who we were following online or were following us, and or made new people, found new people to
Mm.
um, follow and connect with, and that was lovely. That was very cool. Um, I've been seeing a couple recently of people who have met in real life, um, and yeah, I think that would be cool one day. I'm sure it will happen. Well,
Oh,
there's someone here in New Plymouth who is in the community and who follow, and I happen to recognise her photo from a local shop where she works, and I did that. I walked up to her and said, "This might seem really weird, and you might not be the person, but I'm an upcycled life. Are you such and such?" And she was. So yeah, so that was nice. And so we are in regular contact, through that. But the first conversation when I went up to her and asked and thought, she's going to think I'm incredibly weird if she's not the lady on Instagram.
you collect pieces that you're going to use eventually. What's your storage like? Is there a particular way that you store things? Because I know that that's something that I struggle with.
When I say I collect, I am pretty selective.
Mm.
I think I would get too overwhelmed if I just had, shelves and shelves and shelves of it. So I do have a cupboard with drawers, and there's a drawer with doilies and a drawer with fabric scraps, and then the shelves with pieces of fabric um, that I'll use, that I've thrifted, that are generally smaller. They're not
Hmm.
pieces to make garments for myself out of. Um, and I am pretty organized about making sure things get washed and put away and are in their right place. So I sort of know what I've got.
Yeah.
And I would say I've got more selective as time's gone on. A, because otherwise I'll run out of storage space. B, I do find it's getting harder to find things. It's, I think, maybe upcycling and repurposing, and that has got a lot more trendy.
Mm.
Um, and so there's perhaps not as easy to find things. But there's certain things I'll always look out for. I always have a look at the ties. I'll always have a look at the vintage linens, sewing patterns, buttons. I mean, you can probably see behind me, but that's my button collection, and it's almost all thrifted over the years. Just I very, very rarely have to buy a button these days. I just go into the right color jar and try and find something. Um,
So for our
yeah,
listeners, you've got two shelves behind you.
yeah.
And how many jars are there?
Um,
16?
they used to just all be mixed in together, and then a few years ago, I did the whole very laborious thing of tipping them all out and then color coding them into vintage jars. But it's made life so much easier. So there's a jar there, for example, of blue buttons that I can just I'll show you. So I can just go in there and, you know,
Hmm.
um, find what I want. Bit harder when you need you've got a pattern that wants 9 buttons exactly the same, but I'm not usually too worried about that. I'm quite happy to mix and match a bit.
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, so I do collect things, but I also love fabric. Yeah, I love fabric stores, especially some of the ones that are a bit more boutique-y and curated. I have to travel for those, so that's probably a good thing. Otherwise, I might have too much fabric. Yeah, and I still make things from new fabric. It's not. I'm not exclusively old stuff. Yeah.
I think if you were exclusively old stuff, it would be, again, another challenge to continually find those
Yeah.
pieces so
Yeah.
that you can then use them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know for me, um, absolute extremes are a bit stressful. Like if I set myself, I could only use old fabric, or I could
Mm.
only, like I just, that would take probably some of the joy out of it. I like the coming up with a creative idea, whatever it be made out of, but something that you think, yes, I would really love to try and make that, and I think I would love to wear it.
Mm.
I think I'm getting better at that. When I first discovered the sewing community and Instagram, I think, well, I know I was pretty guilty of just trying to make all the things, like there was,
Yeah.
so I discovered indie pattern companies at the same time because they were online, and some of those fabric stores, they had an online presence. And I think I just probably went a bit mad, and I made a lot of things um, because they look cool online, but probably weren't me. And I tell you, the thing that really probably shaped my sewing was the Me Made Mays. I discovered that, and I've done that for 3 years, and really tried to do, the way it's intended with a pledge, and you wear your Me Maids and you examine your Me Made wardrobe. And I just found, like, I just discovered I was really probably making the wrong things, and also discovered that I really need to make I think you pronounce it twill, although it spells like toil, and it feels like a toil to me. I don't enjoy making the dummy run, but I have to get the right fit and style. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was probably a mess. That was the biggest change for, I don't know, 40 years of sewing. I never made one, and then
Yeah.
now I just about always make one.
I'm finding that if I do a toile, which is that test run,
Yeah.
it actually gives me an idea of not just the fit, but I can go through the instructions and actually go, oh, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And so by the time I get to the fashion fabric that I want to use, I feel a lot more confident in this might actually work now.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll mark on the instructions, things like make sure you line this up, these pleats,
Yeah.
because you've just discovered in your dummy run that it really sticks out if you don't.
Mm,
Or with the fashion fabric in mind, you know, you can see the potential pitfalls that could happen if
yeah.
it's quite a thick fabric. Or yeah, it is a really worthwhile process. I know I have to do it, but I don't love sewing. I don't love sewing it because I usually use the most, I don't make a wearable 12
Wow.
because I know it's not going to fit when I first make it. So I don't want to waste any sort of good fabric. So
Mm,
I use, old sheets and, thrifted sheets and old stained tablecloths. And they're really not that fun to sew with, like I
no.
don't. So yeah, it's one of those things that I know I have to do, and it really does make a difference. But I don't love that part of it.
Mm,
I just want to get through that part. Plus, I'm learning how to make the adjustments. Like I have to go to the internet. Luckily, everything's out there.
yeah.
You Google everything, and someone's got a YouTube video on how to move a bust dart, or like it's all there. It's just got to find it.
The interesting thing listening to you is that you've made the decision, you've tried things and you've made the decision around what's going to keep you motivated, what you love doing, and what's going to drag that energy out of you so that you sit there going, I don't know, I don't want to keep doing this.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I love sewing, like we all do. I love the whole process of it. I love
Mm.
the initial design when you're trying to think of the fabric and the pattern and match them, and I find the process of just step by step, doing each step quite therapeutic almost. Like I use that hashtag sewing as my therapy, but it really does feel like it.
Mm.
I do really enjoy it. But I also am well aware and have become more aware since I've been on Instagram that, I don't actually need a whole lot more clothes. It's not like I'm ever going to wake up in the morning and have nothing to wear,
Mm.
but I want to sew. So my compromise where I've landed is to sew less, but it takes longer and maybe it's a little bit more challenging for me. Like it's just pushing my skill set a
Mm.
bit each time. So that way I feel less guilty about making more stuff, and I can still enjoy the process, which I never want to give it up. I guess I could be very selfless and just sew for other people, but I do like sewing for myself. So yeah, yeah.
So, for people who are watching and listening, watching or listening, what advice would you give them to keep sewing?
If this is going to make sense, find your lane and then stay in it. I think it's so easy to get pulled in so many different directions with sewing. There are always, especially if you're online, there are so many different fabrics out there and new things being released and new patterns and new trends. And it's easy to, I mean, I'm the same. I've got a make list in my head that's way too, I'll never be able to make all the things that I think I want to make, you know,
Yeah.
and that can get a bit overwhelming too. So I think, yeah, find your groove and then stay in that, stay true to that. And for me, it's become, this is just personal, it's become slower, more challenging projects. Yes, I still want to enjoy them. I never want to be, struggling my way through a project that's way too hard for me and I don't like it, and be in the community because people will encourage you and give you ideas all the time, which is lovely. Yeah.
I agree with you. Find your groove and keep going with that. And it's great to know that you've slowed down, but slowed down for the pleasure of sewing rather than the stress
Yeah.
that can come from sewing.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you never, well, with any of your hobbies or your interests,
Mm.
you never want it to be a burden, do you, or a chore or a stress. And when it's becoming that, I think you have to, we all have to just relook at it and work out what is it that's causing the stress and then try and step away from that and back into the thing that brings joy, which is my word of the month. I love sewing. I've said that, and I also do love sewing other things. Like I'm at the moment mostly sewing for myself, but I do love. I created a bag, a very simple tote bag, last year for a work colleague who doesn't live here, lives in another part of New Zealand with a tea towel. I found that's another thing I love looking for, souvenir tea towels.
Mm.
Do you know how many souvenir tea towels there are in op shops? And back in the day, people got one from everywhere they visited. I'll have to say there's a lot of Australian souvenir tea towels in our op shops.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's about creating for me out of fabric. And sometimes it's, at the moment it's mostly clothes for myself, but other times it's other things, whatever, you know, sparks my imagination.
Okay. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing what keeps you going and how you've figured that out because that sort of thinking is actually good for people who are sitting there at the start of the year thinking, what am I going to do this year? How am I going to do it? And then possibly stepping back and taking another look at, again, what motivates them and what they can now either focus on or put aside for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the hardest things I've found with sewing for myself is finding your own style.
Mhm.
And I think that's a process. It really takes time. And I still keep making mistakes. I think that's my style. That'll look good. And then I make it and I'm like, oh no, it doesn't. So, and so one of the ladies who follows me pointed out when I was doing Me Made last year, when I was trying to work out what were keepers, what made some things keepers, she made a really good point. She said, even though something can suit us, so it can suit our body shape. So when you look at it on a person's body, it can look nice and flattering. And people looking at it objectively can say, oh, that looks very nice. It still might not be your style. You could still not feel really comfortable in it. So style's a big thing, there's a lot of components, and I'm still working on what's mine. At the moment, it seems to have, doilies and upcycled tablecloths in it, but
And you've got a stash of them that you've been collecting, so that's a
yeah,
great marriage. Tracey, thank you for coming onto the podcast of Sober 50, giving me your time, and it's lovely to hear your accent because that's part of the joy of doing this podcast is people from all over the world. So thank you, Tracey.
Oh, well, thank you for asking. I was incredibly surprised and very flattered and a little bit scared when you reached out to me to ask me if I would be interested, but I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome. And have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
See ya.
This episode of So Organised Style podcast for Sober 50 was video and audio produced by me, Maria Theoharis, in my sewing room with permission from Tracey. Sound by bensound.com. If you'd like to support the production of So Organised Style podcasts, pop over to Patreon. Make sure you direct message Sandy on Sober 50 to support their challenges and posts going forward this year. Go back through the podcast archive to hear and see more people from the sewing community. There are over 450 episodes to listen and watch. I look forward to being with you in your sewing room next time. Stay safe, everyone.